One of my guests had his novel rejected 132 times before seeing his words in print. To discuss the joys and challenges of being a self published author, I'm joined by Richard Wall, author of Blue Green Fans Against the Empire. Hi, Richard.
Hi, how are you doing?
Also, Nikesha Williams, author of several books and producer host of the Black and Published podcast. Hey, Nikesha.
Hey, Ann. Good morning.
Good morning. And Karen Renee, a local romance novelist, author of Unforeseen Riot, as well as 21 other books. Hey, Karen.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So, Richard, you wrote for me in a previous life, in the days of the original Folio Weekly. Writing has always been your passion,
Correct.
and your topics are a little obscure. As I recall, one of the stories that you wrote for me at Folio was about Denny Fouts, titled "The World's Most Expensive Male Prostitute."
Yes, which was a headline you wanted. I wanted a different one.
Oh,
But
oh, did
go
we
to you,
argue over
and it
that?
was a right move. Yeah.
Okay. So, but your current book is about ancient Greece,
Ancient Eastern Roman Empire
Roman Empire, sorry.
sports. Kind of when I first decided I wanted to write fiction, I wanted to write about three things: politics, driving, and sports. I've done the other two, which need some work. But this one about sports was about, I learned that there was a riots called the Nika riots in Constantinople in 532 AD CE. And basically, sports fans united to overthrow the emperor. And I'm not going to say whether they did it or not, but it was a time when sports fans, I mean, we think we're nuts about sports. No, we are nothing compared to them. They would go out rioting, they'd destroy the city, they'd murder each other. Actually, sometimes after chariot races, it was called the murder hours. And it just things were escalating. And these teams were the blue, the green, the red, and the white. And we think about, you know, gladiators and that kind of stuff, but in the Roman world, chariot racing was much more popular. And these four teams have had a history of about 500 years of hatred, even by the time we got to 532 CE, and then it blew up.
And I saw in your notes that Among the Thugs by Bill Buford was one of your inspirations. That's about, English soccer fans, which they always seem a little next level when it comes to being
Yes.
competitive.
Well, they could learn a thing or two from the blue green fans.
Yeah.
And I loved running into Bill Bruford's book because I told the story from the point of view of a rioter, because the riots were the thing that were causing all this problem, and really the emperors almost gave up against these sports fans in a way, but the riots were a heck of a thing. And I learned from his book with the English rioters how riots go off, who can lead them. And my character actually has a skill of being able to lead a mob towards a property or away from it. And he made money that way. So Bill's book was excellent. I learned a lot.
So something about the research appeals to you, though, Richard. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
you spent hundreds of hours working on this particular book.
Correct. And I never knew about it before. I majored in history in college, but it was mostly European English history. But so I just, when I learned about this thing, I went, okay, here's my sports novel. And I'd never dreamed it would be about, 1,500 years ago. But I was just flabbergasted about what's always drawn me to it is the power of sports and society and of team belonging, which we Jaguars fans or whoever you are know, the Gators fans, all over the country, all over the world, people are nuts for sports. And if we take all that energy that people put into sports and time and money, we could cure cancer, poverty, world hunger, and stupidity, But it's always been amazing to me. So that's kind of a subtext
Yeah.
of why I wrote this book. And it was an amazing time, I thought.
Nikesha, you have been writing for many, many years, a lot of those years as a self-published author, but you now have the Holy Grail, which is a book deal, right?
Yeah, I do.
How different is it?
Uh, it's a lot different. So like when you're self-publishing, it's as the title says, you do everything yourself. You're writing. Um, Hopefully you're not your own editor. I was not. I hired editors. But even that, I'm paying out of pocket for an editor. I'm paying out of pocket for the graphic designer. I'm doing the copywriting myself, doing the page design, the interior layout myself, making sure it's uploaded to all the distributors and it's going to be live on the right day at the right time. The pre-orders are right. Like you're doing all of that work yourself. And so you have to be very meticulous and anal about it. And so like, the art of it is the writing. And then when you're self-publishing, once the writing is done, you have to look at it from a business perspective. Now, it's still a business perspective, but it's a little different. I actually had an author say to me that, as a traditionally published author, you're both the client and the customer. And so like the latest book I wrote, The Seven Daughters of Dupree, was bought and acquired by Scout Press. But now we also want to sell that book to other people. So they bought something from me and now I have to sell it to other people. So client and customer, and making sure that it's right. And so I've done 3 rounds of edits. I thought I was done after the second round. The third round almost took me out. Um, and then when that third round was completed, I think my editor sent me one more note. She's like, please don't kill me. Do this one last thing. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to take me a week. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it now. And it took me 4 hours. And so it's different. And so now the book has been finally being accepted for in production. I have a release date. Um, and I'll be getting like copy edits next. And so like the process doesn't stop, but it's all toward the goal of getting the book on the shelves. But not only getting the book on the shelves, but having a marketing budget behind it, having a whole team of people, a whole company of people who are like, okay, we invested in you and gave you this advance, and now we want to make our money back. And I'm like, I want you to make your money back so then I can earn royalties and continue to make more money. So it's also a numbers game and it's also a economic thing. So you really do have to look at it as, when you're writing a book and you're publishing, whether you're self-publishing or have a big 5 deal like I do now, the fun part is the writing. Everything else after that is business.
Hmm. We are talking with formerly self-published authors about self-publishing. I want to take a quick call from Jim in Riverside because he has a question. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, I'd like to ask your ambitious guest, for self-publishing, do you still need an agent, and where can I find a trustworthy editor?
Oh, those are great questions. I want to ask you, Karen. I mean, you've published, as we said, 22 books, primarily romance books. Um, do you have an agent? Have you ever felt the need for an agent?
I do not currently have an agent. And the only, I don't know, right now I would only consider an agent for potentially translations or further audio book deals, because distributing that and producing those types of works is much more cost intensive and labor intensive. And as for Jim's question about finding an editor, that took me almost as long as it did to write the actual book,
Wow.
because that's a relationship that I wanted to build, and this person has such a direct impact on the manuscript, and so it was a matter of just networking with other authors and finding someone who was the right fit for my subgenre and my voice.
And so tell us how you got started writing. You've been, and you loved writing since you were a young person, but when did you
Yes.
begin doing it?
I wrote my first book in my 20s, but then I didn't go anywhere with it because I feel like, sometimes your first book is where you make all of the mistakes. And so that book's just going to live under the bed, so to speak. And then after I had a child, and it was getting close to time for me to either, re-enter the workforce or figure out something. And my husband said, "Why don't you write a book?" And so I did and tried my hand at self-publishing, and it just grew from there.
And did you start self-publishing after trying to a more traditional route, or did you just go straight to it?
I had tried submitting a short story to Ellery McQueen magazine because it's a mystery-based magazine, and was rejected. And then I just, when I learned about the self-publishing industry and the boom, I decided to give it a shot because I really do like having all of that control for myself.
Richard, I know that you've dealt with the question of an agent or not an agent or who you can rely on as an editor, and there are some pitfalls out there that can exploit young writers or new writers.
Yes, with the explosion of self-publication, there's also an explosion of an industry to help people be self-published. Um, Conferences, joining organizations, newsletters, things like that. You can hire to the caller's question. You can hire an editor as Karen has done, and Nikesha has found one and used before. You can find them through. There's a every area has a local writers group, and here in Jacksonville, I'm not affiliated with it, but River City Writers, it's Writers Helping Writers, and the caller might want to check there first, and they could put you in the right direction for editors. I I might have made a mistake. I edited my book myself because I am the editor in chief of a medical marketing company in Denver, Vanguard Communications. So I'm working with words and things all the time. Um, I think I did a pretty good job, but I'm not sure. But that saved me a lot of money, you know. And Karen has developed a relationship with an editor, so I took the shortcut like that. And you really only need an agent if you're trying to get published traditionally, because that's the avenue into a publishing house. It used to be you could send your manuscript to a publishing house. That's really not the way to go anymore. You need an agent. So, and there are a lot of them out
Really?
there.
So, and was that the key for you, Nikesha, getting an agent in terms of getting to be published, or how did that work for you?
So the Seven Daughters of Dupree is my first like big five book. So it's coming out from Scout Press, which is an imprint of Gallery Books at Simon and Schuster. When Simon and Schuster, of course, is one of the top five major publishers in the country, yes, but also in the world. For that book, I did have an agent. For the book that came out before that, which was also traditionally published, it was a smaller book. It was called Mardi Gras Indians, my first nonfiction work, and that was published by LSU Press. I did not have an agent at that time. And the way that book came about was because I was freelancing and I had written an essay. And I've told the story before on this program. I had written an essay for the Bitter Southerner called "Beans and Rice More Than a Poor Man's Meal." And then the acquisitions editor from LSU Press reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I read your essay. We're doing a series of books. Would you like to write for us?" And so that was something that I negotiated and did on my own.
Mm.
With the Seven Daughters of Dupree, I was very intentional about, you know what? I need to stop self-publishing. There was an event that happened that we don't have to go into. I was like, you know what? There's a better way to do this. And so I written the book, I revised it, and then I started submitting for an agent. And I had done that with my very first book, For Women, in 2015. Yeah, when I first finished 2015. And I had gotten an agent then, but things didn't work out, and I ended up self-publishing for a number of years. But with Seven Daughters, I knew I had something, and I knew I had something by when I started querying for an agent. I had like a list of 17. I think I queried the first 12. And after sending that first batch of queries in 2022, I got 6 immediate requests for a full manuscript, which is like really good feedback. Like, okay, this is going to work. And it did. And so I signed with my agent, Peter Steinberg of UTA, which is a very large talent and literary agency based in New York, in March of last year. And then we went on submission with the book in May, and the book sold in a week.
Wow. We're talking about the rewards and challenges of self-publishing. If you have self-published, if you have questions about it, we would love to hear from you. Give us a call at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Karen, one thing that I thought was really interesting about your books, I mean, they're romance books. They often surround kind of a biker theme or sort of an outlaw character
Yes.
theme. But they also come with a playlist, which I thought was fascinating. So at the beginning of every book, you kind of have this playlist that goes along with the story, and it's very eclectic. I mean, you've songs from Danzig, from The
Yeah.
Clash, from Florida. It's a very broad spectrum. How did you think to do that? Where did that come from?
I So to me, the best day is when I buy a new book and I get new music and the two mesh. Like the songs just go with the story. And I happened to be reading another self-published author, and her book started with a playlist, and I thought, well, why can't I do that? So anytime, something from a song will inspire a character or inspires a scene, then that tends to make the playlist. My playlists are much longer than what actually gets published because things just have to go. But I love music, and I just feel like that's one way to give the reader something extra.
Are you listening to those songs when you're writing those books?
In some cases, yes. And then after that, I can't listen to that song anymore without thinking of those characters. So it's like a double-edged sword.
And how do you get your story ideas? Where do you get your inspiration? And what's your the way that you approach writing a book? Like, what's your process?
Normally I have an inciting incident. I just will, inspiration will strike with how these two characters will meet. And then, whatever problem is facing the heroine, I'll have to do research on how, you would actually solve that. But, with the vigilanteism of the heroes, they tend to want to try to solve things themselves. So.
And so, what kind of audience do you have? What feedback do you hear from your readers? How do you connect with them? How do they get your stuff?
Most of my readers will connect with me on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and I target readers of other similar authors in my subgenre because it's a pretty wide area of romance.
I was interested to learn. We recently had on someone who focused almost exclusively on hockey romances, and I was
Yes.
like, I was dumbfounded. I didn't realize that was actually like a subgenre that was a thing, but it is.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of space in that field for niche writing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And readers will have different tastes, as the seasons progress. And so.
Interesting. Nikesha, I want to ask you about your approach to choosing topics because a lot of times your books have been rooted in or keying off of events in real life, like the murder of Trayvon Martin or Hurricane Katrina, but then you kind of bring in, a personal story or perhaps just a human story that reflects some of that. So how do you integrate, actual things in real life with the fiction?
So I think the reason that there's always like a news peg to it is because I'm a newsie. Like I was a news producer, I'm a journalist by trade. So that was always in my mind and those kinds of stories and doing that work. It was always present in there. But I'm endlessly curious about people and endlessly curious about their relationships to one another. So with Four Women and the sequel, The Appeal of Ebony Jones, yes, it started because the news at the time was the murders and the killings of Trayvon Martin and Jordan Davis. But then the question to myself was, this is happening to Black boys and Black men. Where are the Black women in the stories? Like, it's not just the grieving mothers. Like, where are they? And we know it's happening. So, like, you see now, you see Sonia Massey or the Sandra Blands, the Rakia McBrides, Renisha McBrides, and Rakia Boyds, and so
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor, so many. And, like, we can call those names now. But in 2013, when I started For Women, there were no names to call. Like, that there was this hashtag that began Say Her Name, and then the Say Her Name project exploded out of that. And so now you may know some names, but it's still even not as on par with the boys and the men. So like that's where those stories came from. Beyond Bourbon Street obviously came from Katrina, and that novel was an outgrowth of my senior thesis in undergrad, which that was 2008. So right after Katrina happened, my grandparents, both of my parents are from New Orleans. My mother's parents lived in the lower Ninth Ward off Claiborne Avenue on Charbonnet. And so my grandmother's house had 23 feet of water. She never went back home after 2005. Like they went to clean out the house, but then she ended up moving to Mississippi with an aunt. And so writing the original story novella in undergrad, by the time I became an adult and got married and had children, I wondered, what would it be like to make a life in the lower Ninth Ward 15 years post Katrina, where if you go to New Orleans, you go to the lower Ninth Ward almost 20 years post Katrina now, and you go see what it looks like the storm was a year or two ago. It's still empty plots of land and nothing like it was when I was a child and would go visit. So like that was the inspiration there. And so there are always many different catalysts, but I'm always concerned about the people. And the same thing for The Seven Daughters of Dupree. That novel is like an epic. So it expands from time from 1999 to 1860. It's about the secrets kept between mothers and daughters over the course of 7 generations. There were several different inciting incidents and stories that I wanted to tell about colorism, about passing, about the impacts and legacy and the vestiges of slavery and how that carries in Black women's lives from, again, 1860 all the way to 1999. But it is also a story about family and about mothers and daughters trying to do better as they go on and as they were raised, and what may keep them from that, or what turning points in their lives have kept them from being one way or turned them into something else.
We have a question from Tom on Facebook. I'm going to direct to you, Richard. He says, how do these writers identify and reach their market? First of all, how do you define your market when you're self-published? You don't have somebody that's sort of telling you, oh, this is who this is going to reach, or this is the best audience to pursue.
Right. Marketing is a big challenge for me, but I guess a major way is, through social media, which everyone has access to, through Amazon also, which most self-published writers are on, and that's one way to do it. There are many varieties of that. The way you can advertise your work or not. You can also try to do things like get on your local radio show and talk about it. You can pitch to newspapers. You can ask to be a guest blogger on a website that covers writing and certain kind of things. It also highly depends on your genre. My genre in this book is historical fiction. And so that's the way you need to kind of go, or those are the readers you want to get. And as Karen was saying, try to get readers who are reading similar books to yours. So I'm currently right now on a big learning curve trying to learn Amazon's advertising algorithms.
Oh.
And it's pretty much like Nikesha was saying, you're on your own. You're marketing it on your own. You're the writer. You're the producer. You are the talent. And yeah, you got to market the thing too. It's an uphill battle for me and for a lot of writers.
I mean, you've also had to deal with a lot of rejection, as we alluded to. How do you keep your spirits strong, when you're getting rejection after rejection from literary agents?
Yeah, well, first, they're all idiots, of course. But no, I'm just kidding. It's very hard to break into traditional publishing. An agent may have a certain thing he or she is looking for, and maybe their house is pushing another title that's similar to yours. Maybe Eastern Roman Empire and chariot racing has been done before. I was kind of sunk when the new movie of Ben-Hur came out, and then I went, "Oh, this is terrible." So that's all right for me. But
you can still sell the film rights.
I can still sell the film rights. That's right. And yeah, it's pretty difficult.
I will say, I mean, I did start on your novel just last night, but it is a very enjoyable read. I mean, I'm liking it a great deal.
Well, good,
So,
good.
We have a question I want to direct to you, Karen, from Jermaine. She says she wants the authors to give a step-by-step on how to self-publish. What's the just kind of nickel version of how you do that?
Well, first you have to finish the book, and that can be very daunting. And once you've had it edited and you have a polished product that you're willing to put out there, I would open an account on Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing, and then you would need to figure out what kind of cover. I paid for a cover. I pay for all of my covers because designing your own cover is not necessarily the right way to go. You may think you are your own reader, but you don't necessarily have your finger on the pulse of the market, and that cover is the first thing that most people see.
Interesting.
But I would get a cover, have the manuscript ready, upload to Amazon, and then decide if you're going to be exclusive with Amazon or you're going to try to go with other retailers. And then there are distributors such as Drafted Digital that you can use to help streamline that process so that it's not completely time consuming.
And I'm going to ask you, Jermaine, now you're on the air. Is that answer your question? Is that sufficient, or do you have additional questions about how to get there?
Well, that's a great beginning. I was writing down what everyone said. And my book is fictional. Is it the best way to go is through Amazon, or are there other avenues to take?
Good question.
There are other avenues you can take. I believe there's a distributor called Publish Drive that can get you into Amazon and other retail platforms if you just want to do one thing one time. But I believe they charge a fee on top of taking a percentage of your royalties. But most of the successful self-published authors that I know start with Amazon and then grow from there.
Richard.
There's another outfit you can go with called Ingram Spark. They are free also, and they can publish in libraries, in bookstores. Sell to those places, and on other online platforms like Apple Books, Nook, things like that.
Okay, I've got a call from our friend Stanley. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Great subject. But my message is out to Miss Williams. I am so proud of you, and I want to thank you for what you are doing for the African American community. And don't forget, I love you.
Oh,
Thank you, Stanley. I love you too.
that's very sweet. Preparing for this, I was looking at some stats, Nikesha, about self-publishing, and some of the statistics are a little grim. I mean, it says that the average self-published book sells 250 copies, but when you really get into it, the average book by a professional publisher sells just about 3,000 copies over the lifetime of the book. So it's a tough business.
Very. Again, you do it because you love it and you do it for the art. You talk about marketing. I am not the algorithm girl, but what I did know how to do was order my own books and go pop up somewhere, which we've talked about. Or because I was working in television, being on programs like First Coast Connect or local stations in Jacksonville, or I would drive to Savannah or
Let
Orlando
me ask
or
you this.
Tampa.
You're saying that you would go onto Amazon, buy your own book, and then go sell it?
So when you distribute, I used Amazon in the beginning, but then I switched completely over to Ink and Spark because they will distribute to Amazon, to Apple, to Barnes and Noble. So anybody can buy my book that's a retailer or a
Okay.
library anywhere in the world. And I can have nothing to do with it, which is what I really love, because as people started to know who I was, I would see sales that I had nothing to do with
Right.
from the distributor. But what I would do to market was that I would buy author copies of my book. So I would just have boxes in my trunk or in my home.
Author copies.
And then I would go to different events, book festivals. So like the Printers Row Lit Fest in Chicago, the Baltimore Book Festival in Maryland.
This is when you're running around with the
Was
thing
running around with the
credit
square
cards.
reader in my purse. Absolutely. But I would go to these different book festivals. I would go to the Jacksonville Book Festival, which is coming up next month, and then sell my book in person. So now people are being able to meet me as an author, see the books that I have, talk to me about it, establish a personal relationship. And then what I did was to be able to continue to sell to them is I would have a sign-up sheet for my newsletter, which is on my website, newrights.com. And I would then send a newsletter every month to the subscribers. I actually just sent a newsletter today letting them know, like, I have a release date for the Seven Daughters of Dupree.
Which
So
is
January 27th, 2026. So 16 months from today, the book will be out, and hopefully I'll be back to talk about it. And so I would do all of that. Or like, as I said, I use my different news connections. So driving to Savannah, driving to Tampa, driving to Orlando to do interviews about the book, because again, it always had a news tie. And so I was able to pitch it that way, so that I would have the 5-minute clip to post on social media so that people who may have been connected to me but were not near me would see what I was doing, know my work, and then be able to get to it. So it's very difficult to do that at a self-published level. But now it's something I'm going to have to do at the traditionally published level. And so I need to sell a whole lot more than 3,000 copies. I won't say what the number is, but I need to sell a whole lot more than 3,000 copies to begin to recoup on this here advance. So if everybody under the sound of my voice can, on January 27th of 2026, buy a copy of The Seven Daughters of Dupree, I'd appreciate it. But beyond just buying a copy, you also have to promote that book. And so the life of the book is how long you allow it to be. And so now there are authors who will hire independent publicists separate and apart from their publishing company to help them find events and go and do interviews and book festivals and panels. Like I did 2 TED Talks in 2018 in support of my work. I was just doing the things that I thought would help me, and nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's throwing spaghetti at a wall and trying to figure it out, whether you're self-published or whether you're traditionally published. And so you're relying on your network and the people that you know and the skill set that you have to really do it.
But your approach to doing all of this on your own also involved some really brutal hours. I mean, you were working, you were getting up, you had babies to take care of.
Yeah. So when I first started writing for women, I was between jobs. But when I eventually finished it in 2015, like March of 2015, I had been working at Action News Jax. I worked the morning show. So I worked 1 a.m. to about 9 a.m. I would come home from work at 9 a.m. While I was writing while I was pregnant. So when I was pregnant, I would just write from like 9 a.m. to like noon, and then I'd take a nap, wake up, make dinner, do wifely things of that nature. I kept that same schedule after my son was born. So like babies don't sleep anyway, and I was like, I'm used to being up from 1 to 9 a.m. And so I just kept that same schedule until I finished the first draft of that book, and I would write like that for years. And then when I switched from morning shift to a night side shift, so now I'm working 2:30 to midnight. I think my son was about 3. It sucked, but I would only see him for maybe an hour in the morning time. But like I'd wake him up, get him ready for school, get his breakfast, take him to school, and then I come home and from 9 a.m. to like 1:30, sometimes 2, because I was often late to work, I would write all morning and then go to work and work 2:30 to midnight. So when I talk about like I would drive to Tampa and Orlando, there were days where I would wake up at 5 a.m., drive 3 hours to Tampa, do a Tampa morning show for 5 minutes, drive back to Jacksonville, and then go straight to work and work
Yikes.
till midnight. And did that for years, or driving down to the Miami Book Festival or the Tampa Book Festival, or different things just to get my work out there and meet people and meet readers and let people meet me and get to know me, and not just me through my work, but like me as a person as
Right.
well.
Richard, there's a Substack that's kind of on writing by a guy named Frederick DeBoer, and he has an agent and a publishing house at this point. But he says that self-publishing leaves writers, quote, in a perpetual state of not knowing if they're a happy amateur or a disgruntled professional.
Very good point.
Where do you feel like you fall on that spectrum?
I am a happy, disgruntled professional self-published writer who would like to be published by a house, a publisher. One thing I want to point out, which was really interesting, Nikesha's book is coming out in 16 months. I could put a self-published book out in 2 weeks.
If it's written.
If it's written.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't write it that fast. Last year, I think there were 500,000 self-published books in the U.S. There were 10,000 traditionally published books. It's really flopping around, but it's a good point. When I wrote my book, every book I've written, I've sent it to trusted friends to read. What do you think? Got good feedback. But before I self-publish it, I send it to Kirkus Reviews. You pay them, and they will give you a review. And if it's terrible review, that's it. I got a good review, and I went, all right, I'm self-publishing. I'm going.
Huh, interesting.
So I know, and I knew before then that it was a good book. I recrafted it. I cut out 35,000 words and changed the pacing after it had been finished for 2 years. I like it even better now. And I'm still getting some feedback that it's a good book. And you saying it was, that's nice. Even if you just in the first chapter, you need to hook them in the first chapter.
Yep.
But yeah, I believe that I'm successful. I don't care if I sell any books. I've done a good job in the story. I wish I could be as prolific as Karen and as published
Karen,
traditionally.
what is your metric for success?
My metric for success, I think, is just if the next book does better than the prior book. I do long pre-orders, and as long as those numbers keep going up, that's one of my main metrics. And also, as long as I keep making the readers happy, because they're pretty vocal. Romance readers tend to be.
Is that right? You get a lot
Yes.
of feedback
Yeah.
from them? Well, I want to thank you all for sharing your stories, all very different stories, but you're all very accomplished writers, and it's great to have you on the program.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you very much.